So much of our anxiety is made up from the unmade shape of unknown dread. If we were able to give better definition to these fears, they might transform. I wonder if those in the know can feel a strange liberation in knowing exactly the number of nuclear warheads on the planet. As a public servant, perhaps I have a duty to use my art as a means of describing what can't be described. If we can use the concert of the senses to better describe the pace and scale of any given problem, we can help snap into focus any pertinent issue. In these descriptions of existential risks might lie salvation. I should write up a list and see if turning them into music helps. If we knew what was at stake, we might start acting a little nicer to each other. Over to our co-host, Sam Potter, in the studio. Thank you.
Hello, Internet. Hello, Geoff Dembicki. Hello, Edo van Breemen.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm here now, and we're going to have a conversation about that thing we do called Earthcry. But before we get into Earthcry, I just thought it'd be nice just for people who don't know us or have not heard about any of us through their friends or on the internet. Maybe you could introduce yourselves a little bit.
Hi, my name is Edo van Breemen, and I work in spatial sound design, and I also compose music for films and studied environmental science. And I met Sam in a concrete bunker in Berlin last year, and sort of proposed an idea I had about connecting old growth trees with a strand of wire that would sense when they were chopped down and send a message to trigger a scream in a room in a different part of the world.
And in one of those rooms on the other side of the world in New York, a tree came down and triggered a sound in Geoff Dembicki's room.
I'm a journalist who has written about the environment and climate change for close to a dozen years now. And I lived in Vancouver for quite a long time, and literally days before my partner and I moved to New York, Edo got in touch with me and he's like, I have this crazy idea related to climate change and we should talk about it. And I was kind of intrigued. And so we met up and Edo kind of described this project where you guys would take vast data sets that are very difficult for the average person to wrap their mind around. Like, for example, the amount of Arctic sea ice that's melting in any given hour. Just like information that is so huge, it doesn't make sense. It's not real. And the idea was to use that sound to create, use that data to create sheets of melody and immersive sound environments so that someone stepping into a room would feel the cosmic impacts of climate change and environmental destruction in a very sort of visceral, emotional way. And the idea was to like go past or sort of like short circuit their brain in a sense. And just get them to feel like very emotionally like what we're doing to the planet. And this kind of appealed to me because I'd been writing all of this stuff about climate change and kind of struggling to figure out a way to make the story like pop to people, to get people interested, to get people to care, and to get people to react with it in the same way that they do when they see like Trump on the news or something. Just that like intense emotional reaction. And so that was just kind of the beginning of a conversation that's continued for about the last 8 or 9 months or so and has led us up to this point.
The sheer scale of a lot of these data sets and a lot of these issues that the Earth is facing is so astronomical and so very, very hard for the human mind to comprehend. How can we bring that pace and scale down to a human level?
I mean, that's kind of the big challenge that we're all facing as a human species, I think. But what I found really interesting about this particular project is that it directly addresses that tension between what an individual experiences emotionally right now at this moment, the tension of that with like the reality of an iceberg the size of Atlanta breaking off into the ocean, which happened in the past few weeks. And I think the problem is just this matter of scale. Like, in a certain sense that like the Amazon rainforest is collapsing. But if someone just like walked up to you and punched you in the face on the street, that would consume you for your entire day and possibly like weeks to come, and you would never think about all of the trees dying. Because one thing is just like there, it's now, it's happening, and the other thing is like off in some like more intellectual part of your brain. But if you kind of think about some of the reasons that the environmental movement started, it was all just because of sort of a shift in consciousness that suddenly allowed these big abstract things to become more comprehensible. And so there's that like famous photograph that was taken of the Earth from outer space in the late 60s or 70s, I think. And just this like one image is a huge part of why we have an environmental movement now, because people could see the earth as a whole in a way that they couldn't before. And so I think what's interesting about what Earthcry is doing is it's kind of operating on it's kind of operating in a similar dynamic, and that is if we can take these like vast data sets and turn them into the sounds that a single person hears when they're in a room, that kind of replicates the punch in your face moment, or the seeing the earth as a whole for the first time. And without being too, self-aggrandizing, I think this could result in some pretty interesting shifts in how we see the problem.
You're perfect for this, really, because you do that. And Edo, you're perfect for this because with your Lobe Studio, you're using sound as an investigative tool to try and kind of affect people into different states. Can you tell me a little bit more about how we can communicate the outside inside to actually get the results we're looking for, or at least experiment to find some kind of weird mid-ground?
I mean, I can talk a little bit about the project that I've been working on with a cognitive behavioral trauma therapist. And that's kind of the starting point for how we're trying to use spatial sound to sort of speak to people's emotions about the environment. So we were looking at some work from Peter Levine, who proposed different way of dealing with trauma. He studied animal behavior, and I think he was also a physicist, but then he became a trauma therapist. Lots of writings out there by him. He sort of has this modality that deals with trauma therapy in terms of a somatic response. So while he's taking people through a trauma therapy, he's asking them to take different body positions, played out against the person guiding them through this process, also with themselves, holding themselves in certain ways, lying down, standing up, using different sort of body, like hand movements and gestures. So my project involves combining these positions with soundscapes in spatial sound. And I was just finding, as I sort of developed this project, that people were able to be kind of coerced into a deeply meditative state, more so with this kind of spatial sound arrangement than with just like a binaural headphone setup or in stereo, especially when they're put in a room kind of where they can walk around and experience the space. You create a kind of like sound temple atmosphere. And in that space, I think you can provoke a much wider range of emotions. So without being, extremely manipulative, because this is kind of like, these are untested studies clinically, and I think quantitatively there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But by getting some qualitative evidence, we could see how people were responding to certain types of sound, certain types of pads made by synths or acoustic instruments. And then this conversation began about how to sonify climate change data, because I feel like I've had a lot of experience through scoring films, trying to kind of create emotional backgrounds to narratives. But the idea with climate change sonification is to take pure data and to somehow convert that into sound. And there are various ways we've discussed about doing that. And I guess you have a spectrum of more subjective interpretation and then more kind of hardline sort of quantitative interpretation of the data. So we're trying to merge both of those worlds And that's still a big challenge in what we're going to be developing in the next few months.
And when we're talking about data sonification, you can use different scales, like an Eastern or a Western scale. You could be having the data points like manipulate and change any number of things from volume, velocity. The hand of the creator is quite heavy. MIT recently, they've just turned the coronavirus into music, and the way they're doing it is they're mapping out all the proteins, and then through the length of the notes and through other things they put in there, they're able to literally use it as a way of understanding the structure of the coronavirus. So it's not just a matter of communicating the data, like it is a way of looking into it and actually finding insights and being able to better approach it. We're trying to do the same thing with the climate. It doesn't necessarily have to be all fear. We're not just trying to scare people. We're trying to give people a reframed sense of hope. And I wondered if you had like any words on that, Geoff?
Maybe initially when people hear like these strange people want me to walk into a room and listen to the world being destroyed, I think a lot of people's initial reaction would be like, these like weirdos just want to like freak me out. And you see with like a lot of the entertainment made about climate change, it just sort of has this like nihilistic shock value to it. With Earthcry, we're not just aiming to like make people feel bad and experience like the worst case thing that could happen to our world. I think a lot of it is trying to unblock the grieving process that we're all going through right now in regards to our planet. I think like whether or not you read the news, you walk around every day with the knowledge that like we're doing horrible things to the place we live. And most people, in order to get through the day, push those feelings away, bottle them up, don't deal with them, and then like wonder why they feel so like anxious or frantic or despairing all the time. And I think with this project, one of the really potentially exciting things is to get people in a space where for the first time they're facing all of those emotions that they haven't allowed themselves to actually experience. And so, anytime you deal with a trauma or go through grief, part of that experience is painful and difficult. But part of it also is extremely liberating and joyful, because by facing emotions that you've been trying to run away from, you have the opportunity to experience them in a new way and move into sort of like a different psychic and emotional plane. And so for me, in my own writing, having had to go through this process many times with all of the depressing topics I write about, I find myself feeling a lot of hope, which sometimes strikes people as odd. And I think I also feel just like a sense of calm at the time, because I've allowed myself to run through this whole spectrum of emotions. So with Earthcry, I mean, in theory, we would be allowing people to move through this process in a much quicker time frame.
You're making it sound like a psychedelic experience. It's like confronting your demons in a bad trip just to understand yourself better. It's just in this case, the demons are the world ending, and like the medicine is the experience we put on. And it's almost, I don't know, you kind of make it sound like a shamanic act. It's almost like this old idea of culture, like an old idea of using sound and performance and kind of show tricks or magic even to like reveal the truth, to show people the full range of who they are and then leave them in a better place than when they started. Do you consider what we're doing as magic, Edo?
I think people will have a visceral experience that is completely unknown to them. So I don't know. I mean, magic would be a little bit of a reach, but we do have a pretty interesting space that we're developing this in. So the room that we've built in Vancouver with 4D sound technology has 16 5-foot by 5-foot birch panels. It's essentially speaker cabinet grade wood. And each one of those panels has a vibrational transducer built onto the bottom of it. So that's our floor, these 16 birch panels. And we can send full spectrum sound into those vibrational transducers, which then essentially turns those panels into a speaker. So we can play music and sound into people's bodies so they can physically experience this. They can physically experience these shifting frequencies, which are representative of this climate change data. So for example, one thing that we're working on is trying to represent sea ice melt in Antarctica. So we had a graph and we let a modular modal synth just kind of mimics acoustic instruments, but through synthesis. And we had a sound that really, conveyed the idea of ice breaking, but having the synth kind of crackling and just kind of feel like it's breaking in its frequencies, and playing that into the haptic floor was really an unexpectedly profound experience. It's like kind of shocked by it. So you can get this, I think you can create this other level of sonic illusion with like 3-dimensional sound driven by like an omni speaker array, but then we have like the added surprise level of this haptic floor. So it's all completely untested, and I think like this project to me is kind of like a perfect petri dish for like a experimental tank where we can put people in and see if we can take them through these grief and comprehension spectrums.
A lot of people are going to be very wary of the climate, but they're going to be especially aware of themselves after all this introspection. So if anybody does want to hear what climate change sounds like or feel it as well, the idea is we're trying to make this data more emotional. If you can feel it, if you can smell it, touch it, if it can trigger these things inside you that might turn you into someone who will do something for the problem, or if you can reframe your view on it and turn it into a new sense of hope or liberation, as Geoff does, like that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to shift where you are to where you should be. And I think that's the end of this interview. Not the world. Is there anything else you'd like to say in under 1 minute?
No,